Throughout the history of Star Wars, many a scientist made groundbreaking discoveries that pushed the limits of what technology could do. Some of these, like the invention of the hyperdrive or the airspeeder, made society a better place to live in. Unfortunately, however, many scientists didn't set out with the goal of improving life for everyone in the galaxy. In fact, many of them were several fries short of a Happy Meal and desperately needed some psych meds. We're talking, of course, about mad scientists, depraved men and women who use science to carry out horrific experiments and push the limits of science for evil. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at some of the worst the galaxy had to offer throughout its history. Just to keep things interesting, we're also not going to include the Sith. They were, after all, by definition insane, and Sith alchemy was exclusively designed to create abominations. Instead, we're going to look at the run-of-the-mill men and women who, even without the Force, managed to rival the Sith themselves in their monstrosity. So settle in, grab a cup of tea, and let's talk about some evil scientists.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
For our first entry, let's travel back in time to the time of the Cold War between the Galactic Republic and the reconstituted Sith Empire, and more specifically to the planet of Decevro in the Tyon hegemony, where a scientist was born with auspices far beyond sanity. Enter Dr. Sanus Lorik, a human born to the 37 families of Decevro, a number of noble houses that were the rivals of the Tyon hegemony's ruling royal family. During the Cold War, the Tyon hegemony was an independent nation, and both the Galactic Republic and the true Sith negotiated with it for support of its rich families. In the decades before the Cold War, Dr. Lorik had worked his way up to the position of a royal science advisor on Decevro, and he took advantage of his position's power to conduct illegal genetic experiments focused on viral modification and gene splicing. Eventually, he was discovered and ousted. At the time his work was brought to light, he had 15 specimens in his lab that had been so horrifically mutated by his experiments that their original species couldn't even be identified, much less proven to be sentient. On this technicality, he was let go and simply exiled from the Tyon hegemony rather than imprisoned and charged with a crime. As most mad scientists tend to do, Lorik took this poorly and vowed revenge. After his exile, he relocated to a laboratory on Ord Mantell and began experimenting on the viral strain responsible for the Rakghoul disease. For those not familiar with the disease, the Rakghoul plague was initially created by a Sith alchemist in his quest to live forever. The viral strain developed by this Sith, Canis Mur, however, didn't exactly grant one eternal life. Instead, after a new victim was exposed to the virus through an infected wound, the victim would go through an incredibly painful transformation within 6 to 48 hours, eventually turning into a Rakghoul, a mindless Sith mutant that only cared about mauling living beings. In his lab on Ord Mantell, Lorik claimed to his assistants that he was researching a cure for the disease. During this period of galactic history, Rakghouls were a serious problem on Taris, where they roamed the Undercity and interfered with any and all attempts to reclaim the toxic world. But Lorik wasn't researching a cure. Instead, he was working on weaponizing the disease even more and modifying the virus to more easily cross the species barrier. In 3639 BBY, Lorik got his revenge. He hired pilots to fly creatures infected with the Rakghoul plague to several worlds in the Tyon hegemony. The resulting outbreak saw 5 worlds in the hegemony completely overrun, and the outbreak seemed out of control until quarantine measures were implemented to keep the virus from spreading even further. Kaon was the 5th world to be hit by the virus, and although many civilians were able to be evacuated, the planet was soon overrun by the Rakghouls. Even though quarantine protocols prevented the entire hegemony from being lost to the plague, countless military personnel and civilians were killed by the disease. But Lorik didn't stop there. Despite getting his revenge on the Tyonese, he wanted to go even further, looking to spread the Rakghoul plague across the entire galaxy. He gifted Zama Brak, a smuggler, an infected Risp without letting him know about the creature's condition. Not long after, the Risp transformed into a Rakghoul and went ballistic aboard his ship, infecting many of the crew and killing others. The ship, the Star Dream, was forced into a crash landing on Tatooine, where another outbreak began. By now, the galaxy was experiencing a pandemic that threatened civilization itself. Back on Ord Mantell, Loric's assailants finally discovered what his work was really about and tried to stop him, but failed. Instead, Loric infected them with the Rakghoul virus and kept them in test tubes. After the Titan hegemony outbreak had been contained, people were able to track the outbreak back to Loric and his Ord Mantell base. A strike team was dispatched to the island laboratory where they had to fight through Loric's abominations to take the Doctor out. It turned out, however, that Loric had gone beyond just improving the virus. He had modified it enough to be able to turn it into a weapon, infecting himself and transforming in a bid to kill the strike team. In the end, however, his transformation wasn't enough and the strike team took him down. Even with his successful assassination, Loric had spread the disease far beyond the Taurus Undercity, causing the death of thousands and putting millions more at risk. Following his death, the Highland Organization for Rakghoul Neutralization, known as Thorn, had to put in overtime to manage outbreaks on worlds such as Corellia and Tatooine to prevent the plague from infecting the entire galaxy. Our next entry takes us to Pal City during the time of the Galactic Civil War, when one med student decided to play God and create a cruel fusion of droid and organics that would terrorize the galaxy. The scientist in question was Faison Gore, a med student at Prastine Brak, a prestigious medical academy on Utapau. After graduation, Gore and his friend and fellow student, Gristo Fatruck, had plans to open a surgical center in the capital. However, fate had other plans for the two auspicious surgeons. Not even a month after they opened their surgery, a group of Pau'an gunmen stormed the building and took them hostage alongside one of their Class 1 medical droids. The three were taken away into the plains where the Pau'an raiding parties were concentrated. When Fatruck dared to ask if they were members of the gang known as the Wandering Star, he got a blaster bolt to the chest. The group was attacked by Yutai raiders, however, who killed the armed gunmen holding them hostage. Gore managed to take 7 out of 8 raiders out, taking the last one prisoner. With the help of his medical droid, he hauled the prisoner and his dying friend to a nearby cave where shenanigans began. Not wanting to lose his friend, he tried experimenting on him to save his life. He combined Fatruck's body with the medical droid, creating a cyborg that was droid-based with organic limbs connected. This droid became known as Number 1, and it was only the beginning. After Fatruck's death, Gore began working with the Wandering Star, who were somehow completely oblivious to the fact that Gore might hold a grudge for what they put him through. This, as you can imagine, was a mistake. Gore quickly became obsessed with cybernetic experiments, focusing his entire career on fusing droids and organic matter in what he called the biomechanical union of flesh and circuits. Number 1 was incorporated into a weapon system named the Phalanx Redux Transmitter, which was essentially a system that could transmit a computer virus to nearby droids. When infected with the virus, droids would be reprogrammed to attack and kill any organic near them. In 3 BBY, the Wandering Star tried to sell the transmitter in an auction on Cantonica, and Gore seemingly went along with it. When they were on Cantonica, however, he activated the transmitter and got all the gang members killed, enacting his revenge. As you can imagine, neither the Galactic Empire nor the Alliance were keen on Gore's work. After the incident on Cantonica, the Millennium Falcon crew pursued him and were able to destroy the transmitter, at least so they believed. 10 years later, however, Gore threatened to unleash a droid apocalypse on Cloud City if the stolen transmitter wasn't returned. Lando Calrissian and the Millennium Falcon crew eventually hunted down the transmitter, which had survived their previous attempts to destroy it and gone rogue. Destroying both it and Gore's secret research facility finally neutralized him once and for all. Even then though, the damage was already done. Gore's research was pioneering in all the wrong ways. Later on, a droid known simply as the Scourge used Gore's work as an inspiration to create a number of cyborgs that, after processing, would give the Scourge access to the Force. This was very much not ideal and caused a number of other problems, but that whole mess is a story for another day. But we're not leaving the Galactic Civil War period just yet. Our next entry is somehow an even worse doctor than Dr. Gore, and his patients met with an even worse fate, if that's even possible. We're talking about Dr. Cornelius Evazan, an absolute mad lad. Emphasis on the mad. Evazan was born on the Ecumenopolis of Alsacan, most likely a decade or two before the Clone Wars broke out. Although Evazan went by his title of doctor wherever he went, it's not actually clear if he ever earned a real medical degree. Nevertheless, he worked as a surgeon, and by all accounts, he wasn't half bad at his job. That is, at least, until he went berserk. During the time of the Galactic Empire, he applied to the Imperial Academy and, believe it or not, failed the Psych Eval. Yes, you heard that right. An Imperial officer deemed Evazan too insane to be accepted into the Imperial military, an organization not exactly famous for its scruples and mental health awareness. After his failed application, the Imperial authorities deemed him enough of a danger that they detained him and tried to ship him off to Delrian to be involuntarily institutionalized. Evazan, however, escaped his involuntary hold and fled to the Hindusar system, where he really lost the last of his marbles. There, Evazan opened a surgery to treat patients, allegedly specializing in cyborging and sheep surgery. Unfortunately for his patients, he didn't do a very good job, to their ultimate suffering. Authorities soon tracked him down, forcing Evazan to pack up shop and head to a new system, where he repeated the process of opening up a practice, mauling some people, and fleeing law enforcement. Along the way, he branched out into other nefarious activities like slavery, assassinations, spice smuggling, and other not-so-legal pastimes. As he moved from planet to planet, his list of victims only kept growing. By the time he reached the Corellian system, he had a bounty on his head. In fact, his crimes were so heinous that he had been given the death penalty in 12 systems. The bounty hunter, Jodo Cast, tracked him down there and would have claimed the bounty on his head had he not been saved by the Aqualish Ponda Baba. With his help, Evazan managed to escape, but it wasn't scot-free. As they fled, Cast managed to shoot him, melting half of Evazan's face and scarring him for life. Together, the two outlaws fled to Tatooine, where they ran into a sweet, innocent moisture farmer by the name of Luke Skywalker in the Mos Eisley Cantina. Although they tried to goad him into a fight, they were thoroughly discouraged by the lightsaber of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who cut off Baba's arm before they both escaped. Given Evazan's work with cybernetics, he managed to convince Baba to let him operate, aiming to replace his missing arm with a cybernetic implant. The surgery, however, was a complete failure, and Baba swore he would get revenge on Evazan for ruining his life. Now, as you can tell by now, Dr. Evazan wasn't a very good doctor, and by all accounts, he didn't really try to be one either. Even after his run-in with Obi-Wan, Evazan somehow decided to remain in Mos Eisley, setting up yet another surgical practice by the name of Cutting Edge Clinic. In the 4 rooms of that practice, Evazan performed countless cybernetic surgeries on many unsuspecting patients, most of whom disappeared after they made an appointment with the good doctor. At this point, it's worth delving into what Evazan was trying to do in the first place. Despite his clear mental instability, he wasn't just butchering victims without a goal in mind. In fact, Evazan's many experimental surgeries had a very specific purpose. He was trying to achieve immortality. The doctor believed that if he was able to create a being that wouldn't decay physically, he could achieve eternal life. Over the years, his approach changed, however. After he was forced to flee Tatooine once more, he met up with Ponda Baba, his old partner, and somehow reconciled with him. The two traveled to Ando, Baba's homeworld, and set up shop in a dilapidated castle where Evazan continued his research. It was on Ando that he made a breakthrough in his research. The key to immortality, he theorized, wasn't through preserving the body, but the mind. To this end, he built a machine that could transfer the mind from one being into a new body, and his first would-be victim was none other than his partner. To provide the donor body, Evazan captured an Aqualish senator and prepared them for the transfer. To everyone's general surprise, the mind transfer machine worked, and Ponda Baba woke up in a brand new, fully armed body, while the poor senator woke up in his old, amputated form. If the transfer was a success, Evazan had hoped to transfer his own mind into the body of a perfect specimen, a young man he captured earlier. What Evazan didn't know, however, was that his perfect specimen was actually a disguised bounty hunter out for his head. Gurion Silazar, you see, had a personal beef with Evazan. The bounty hunter's family had been among the doctor's victims, and so he'd set out to get a hefty payment and revenge. On Ando, Silazar walked the doctor up to the castle's rooftop where he'd planned on executing him. To the bounty hunter's bad luck, the doctor's pet Medusa saved his life by attacking Silazar, knocking him off the roof and sending him falling to his death. But hijinks weren't over. If the bounty hunter coming for him wasn't enough, the Aqualish senator, now in Baba's old body, was next, lobbing a thermal detonator onto the roof to take Evazan out. Luckily for Evazan, however, his Medusa was incredibly loyal, and even as the good doctor flew off the roof, the goodest boy sacrificed himself to cushion his fall, sacrificing his life in the process. After Ando, Evazan appeared for some time, though we're certain wherever he went, he was up to no good. During the Galactic Civil War, he re-emerged on Naboo for a time, torturing the local wildlife and managing to create a brand new toxic subspecies, but it didn't seem like he hurt too many people during his time. It was later, sometime after the Battle of Yavin, that he really went back to his old depravities. Walking under Borgma's Gog, Evazan joined Project Starscream, an imperial scientific experiment aimed at creating an army of super soldiers. The good doctor didn't care about that, however. His personal goal was continuing his research into eternal life, and more specifically, bringing the dead back to life. As part of the project, Evazan moved to Necropolis, where he worked with corpses. Now, Necropolis had a special relationship with the dead, if you couldn't tell by the name. A local legend told of the witch Sycorax, whose son had been killed on the planet. Sycorax cursed the entire world, damning the disrespected dead to rise. This led to a local legend about zombies, which was proven to be true on multiple occasions. It's also the reason Evazan traveled to the world, hoping to discover the true reason behind the zombification. Once on the world, the good doctor discovered that, with the fluids of the native boneworms, he was able to create a serum that could reanimate the recently deceased. And so, Evazan developed a formula that could, and did, create an army of undead. But he was still being hunted. Unbeknownst to him, Boba Fett had tracked him down, chasing after the large bounty on his head. He was able to finally kill Evazan, but given his work, it should come as no surprise that it didn't take. Shortly before Fett landed the killing blow, Evazan had injected himself with a megadose of his reanimation serum, which brought him back to life. The Mad Doctor was eventually stopped by a combination of a rogue zombie that still held attachments to its friends and an anti-serum his enemies were able to develop, which killed both him and his army of undead. With the Doctor thwarted and seemingly dead for good, everyone thought the galaxy was finally safe. But it wasn't. Somehow, Evazan survived. As late as 9 ABY, he was still at large, probably butchering people across the galaxy, while his former partner, Baba, was still hunting him down for revenge in the body of that unfortunate Aqualish senator. Sometimes, there really is no justice. The last sentiment was one shared by the next scientist on our list, who made a name for herself by being absolutely awful in every way possible. Jenna Zan Arbor, a female human born on Ventrux in the Outer Rim, had a promising start to her career. As the head of Arbor Industries, she made a name for herself and quite a few credits by saving several planets. On one world, she was able to save the populace from a deadly virus by developing a vaccine to inoculate the population. On others, such as Meliston, she offered aid, such as genetically engineered crops, to help with famines. What nobody knew, however, was that she wasn't just helping these worlds out of the kindness of her own heart. In reality, Zan Arbor was the one causing these problems in the first place so that, when Sith hit the fan, her company could swoop in, save the day, and get all the fame and glory for it. To her intense displeasure, she didn't make nearly enough credits off her so-called humanitarian acts. When she realized she couldn't become rich by being the good guy, she wholeheartedly jumped into villainy. Something that soon caught Zan Arbor's interest was the Force, and more specifically, the scientific aspects of how it worked, how it affected the Force user physically, and so on. Zan Arbor wanted to study the Force from a scientific point of view, and to begin her experiments, she used her connection to the senator of Belasco, Uta Sorn, to set up a lab and hide her work. The senator covered for her experiments, even when Zan Arbor experimented on her own son, a Force sensitive. While experimenting on the young man, Zan Arbor accidentally killed him. Deciding she needed specimens stronger in the Force, she hired a bounty hunter to bring her live Jedi. Her first victim was the retired Jedi Master Nor Rava, whom she had brought to her lab on Simpler 12. Her second victim was Qui-Gon Jinn, whom the bounty hunter knocked out and kidnapped. When Jinn was brought to Zan Arbor's lab, the scientists tortured him almost to death in an effort to discover how his abilities worked. Qui-Gon was eventually rescued by Obi-Wan Kenobi and a small team. Unwilling to let her prized specimen go, Zan Arbor threatened to kill Master Rava if Qui-Gon left. In desperation, Zan Arbor actually did kill her assistant and tried to negotiate the purchase of a huge number of battle droids from a trio of droid dealers. Instead, the droid dealers turned on her and helped Kenobi and his team break into her lab. With the Jedi on her tail, Zan Arbor brought her captive to Belasco, where she continued her experiments. Using the natural waterborne pathogens in Belasco's waterways, she synthesized a virus she planned to release into the planet's water supply, even engineering the virus to grow stronger if it met with resistance. For some unknown reason, Senator Sorn helped her gain access to the water containment facilities where she released the virus. Luckily for Belasco, however, the Jedi caught up to her. Qui-Gon captured both her and the traitorous Senator, and with the use of Zan Arbor's own data, they were able to create an antivirus that cleansed the planet's waterways. Zan Arbor and Sorn were both sentenced to life in prison for their crimes against Belasco and were promptly sent off to a penal colony to do some well-earned hard labor. However, if you're at all familiar with Star Wars, you can already see where this is going. The galaxy hadn't yet seen the end of Zan Arbor and her messed up experiments. In 25 BBY, she somehow escaped the prison and hid away on the planet Vancor in the Outer Rim, relatively close to Florim. On Vancor, she synthesized yet another new drug, which she called the Zone of Self-Containment, which is one heck of a mouthful. The drug was initially a colorless, odorless liquid, but she later developed it further into an airborne form. When exposed to the drug, its victims became entranced, as if someone had cast Charm Person on them. They were docile and blissed out, perfectly happy to be detained. When the Jedi pursued her to the planet, she managed to intoxicate Anakin Skywalker, though he was later rescued by his master and others. From Vancor, Zan Arbor met with Granta Omega, a benefactor willing to fund her research. Her next stop was the planet Roman, where she was protected by the planet's leader, Roy Tedder. After he was overthrown and the Jedi had caught up to her once more, she fled once again. Hoping to mass-produce the Zone of Self-Containment, Zan Arbor built a new facility on Foline in 24 BBY. This facility was called the Blackwater Systems, and its goal was to spread her happy drug across the galaxy. The Jedi caught up to her once again, however, forcing her to flee to Coruscant. What followed was a Looney Tunes-esque chase, where she and her partner tried to assassinate the Supreme Chancellor, then fled to Korriban, then found themselves with their backs to the wall, facing down the Jedi. Somehow, Zan Arbor escaped and went into hiding, at least until 23 BBY. The previous year, Count Dooku announced the formation of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, and, as you can imagine, Zan Arbor jumped at the opportunity to be one of their lead scientists. Generous funding and no pesky morals to restrain her research made the CIS her happy place, which tells you all you really need to know about it. With the support of the Separatist leaders, Zan Arbor created dozens of absolutely devastating biological weapons. One of them you might already be familiar with, since we've previously discussed how horrific it was when deployed: the Stone Mites. With the help of Arcanian geneticists, Zan Arbor developed the Stone Mites that devastated multiple worlds during the Clone Wars. If that weren't enough, she also developed a deadly poison gas that was deployed on Omar Dun, one of Naboo's moons. There, it was used against the local Gungan colony, wiping them out completely. The same gas was also used by Newt Gunray in his various self-defense mechanisms. Of course, the Clone Wars didn't go well for the CIS, but that didn't stop Zan Arbor. A scientist with her talents and loose morals was a welcome asset for the Empire, and less than a year after Order 66, she was on the Imperial payroll. On Belassa, she was put in charge of a secret Imperial project. Using scientists who had been abducted by the Empire and forced to work on the project, Zan Arbor led the weapon development project to synthesize a memory-erasing serum that, when used, would completely erase all traces of certain memories, more specifically, the unpleasant ones. This project, it turns out, was one of Darth Vader's personal endeavors, and he hoped to use the serum to erase his painful memories of Padme Amidala, his late wife. Before Zan Arbor handed the serum over to Darth Vader, however, she was attacked by two fugitives who were helped by one of the scientists on her team. During the fight, they used her own serum against her, wiping almost all of Zan Arbor's memories. In the aftermath, Zan Arbor was left as nothing more than an empty husk, an aging, broken woman barely able to remember her favorite flavor of tea, much less anything of her life's work. After her attackers destroyed her personal datapad and any remaining traces of her research, the threat she posed was finally neutralized, and the galaxy was finally safe from her terrible experiments. Although the fugitives left her alive, Darth Vader was not so kind when he found her bumbling about. When he struck her down, the galaxy became a better place. Zan Arba's legacy, however, lived on in the form of all the research she had done for the CIS and Galactic Empire. Many of her creations would continue to cause anguish for innocents across the galaxy, proving yet again that killing a Viper doesn't cleanse the world of the venom it had injected into it. It just stops it from being able to do more damage. And finally, no foray into the evil scientists of the galaxy would be complete without a look at Dr. Silo, the mortal man who tried to live forever. In his early career, Silo became a specialist in cybernetics, which, as you can tell from the other entries on this list, can be a bit of a red flag. During this time, Silo convinced himself that technology was superior to humanity. His work focused on creating new forms of life through the use of cybernetic augmentation, grafting alien body parts onto droids in the process, much like the good Dr. Gore did. But Silo didn't stop at experimenting on others. He himself became his most prized experiment of all. He mapped out his memories, his personality, and his reasoning procedures, then uploaded it all into a computer system. With his self essentially saved in a database, Silo could grow an infinite number of cybernetically augmented bodies, then download his mind into them to create a perfect copy of himself. That way, Silo could live forever. And Silo's bodies died a lot. By the Battle of Yavin, he was on body number 4, known as Silo 4. Keep in mind, these bodies didn't share a memory bank. Anything the body experienced that wasn't uploaded into the system would be lost forever after the body's death, so none of the Silo bodies ever had to deal with trauma. They did, however, share a common logic pattern, so by waking up, they could deduce something had happened to the previous Silo and act accordingly. Much of this work on cybernetics was done under the patronage of Astartes of Selenon during the Clone Wars. After the declaration of a new order, Silo was brought on by Darth Sidious to work on something of critical importance, saving the life of Anakin Skywalker. Silo and the other scientists brought on for the project were able to save the newly minted Darth Vader's life by replacing his lost limbs with cybernetics and entombing him in a suit of mechanical armor which had built-in life support. Silo and his team had done such good work that Sidious kept them on, allowing them to work essentially outside the boundaries of the law. With full reign to do as he pleased and a generous budget, Silo continued his research into genetic enhancements, melding technology into living flesh. Taking inspiration from General Grievous, he engineered many of his subjects to be able to wield lightsabers with the same efficacy as a Jedi or Sith, but without the need of the Force. Another one of his experiments was Toulon, a fellow scientist whose genius work had contributed to projects such as the Death Star and the Tarkin Initiative. For her, Silo enhanced her cerebellum, connecting her brain to several droids, which she could command with a mere thought. Toulon had already been a genius, Silo reasoned, but after his augmentation, she became even smarter. When it came to non-sentient experiments, Silo was equally ruthless. He created a cyber animation project that optimized the Enforcers. This AI enhanced their animalistic urges while removing any trace of a personality or the ability to feel pain. Instead, the subject would be made to feel only what Silo programmed it to feel. He tested this AI on sentience, but he was hoping to use it on animals too. While working for the Empire, Silo got to make friends with several other messed up people, such as Professor Thlu Rai, who'd done work on the Death Star. Thanks to the Professor's help, Silo was able to create a personal fleet of cybernetically enhanced spacefaring creatures that were, for all intents and purposes, a number of Purgil that he turned into a research base. He also created a defense fleet to protect said organic bases. With his successful projects, Silo slowly grew his influence and began pushing for his creations to be deployed on a greater scale, even going so far as to imply that they could replace Darth Vader. But Silo should have known better. His growing influence put a massive target on his back. The Emperor wanted him gone. However, with the Death Star still under construction and Silo holding significant sway in the scientist's body, Palpatine had to bide his time, worried that taking Silo out would disrupt the numerous projects they were working on. That all changed after the destruction of the Death Star. With this and Vader's other recent failures, Sidious began actually considering Silo's plan to replace the Sith Lord. Instead of killing Silo as planned, the Emperor sent Vader out on a few missions to prove his worth, while he himself summoned Silo to Coruscant to discuss their options. The deal they struck was simple. Silo would pick his most promising subject, and if it won against Vader, Sidious would take it as his new right hand. That said, what Silo didn't know was that Sidious was hedging his bets. Either Silo succeeded and got him a better replacement for Vader, or he failed and Sidious would be able to execute him for treason without fearing the reaction of his fellow scientists. Vader, meanwhile, who had run into Silo on his way out, became suspicious of the scientist and hired a bounty hunter to find him. If you've seen our video on Dr. Aphra, you'll remember the rest of that story. Bounty hunter Black Chrysanthemum, Aphra, and their droids were able to capture Silo 4, find the location of his organic research base, and destroy it after a challenging operation. What we didn't cover in that video was what happened aboard the research base when Vader disappeared for a short time. While Aphra and her team focused on destroying the base, Vader entered the dojo and engaged Silo 5 in a duel. Silo, however, pitted his experiments against the Sith Lord. Before the two sides could exchange blows, Darth Sidious himself arrived and changed the playing field. The Dark Lord of the Sith demanded that Silo demonstrate the merits of his creations by dueling Darth Vader to the death. The fight was inconclusive, however, when some of Silo's experiments refused to fight. The Sith departed, and Silo was sent to work under Grand General Cassio Taga, who sent him to Shu Torron, serving under Darth Vader. By then, Silo was beginning to lose it. Vader's recent victories and his own creation's failure to destroy the Sith Lord were starting to eat away at his ego. Eager to prove his superiority, Silo decided to betray the Empire. All he wanted to see was Vader dead, and so, on Shu Torron, he reached out to the Rebel Alliance, betraying Vader's position so they could take him out. When the trap failed, however, Vader traced the betrayal back to Silo, forcing him to flee for his life. The scientist had played right into Darth Sidious's hands. By betraying the Empire, Palpatine could now execute Silo without risking the negative reaction of the scientists under him, and so he wasted no time in ordering Vader to carry out the execution. Vader promptly tracked Silo and his fleet down to the Crushank Nebulae, where the two sides engaged in a fierce space battle. Despite some initial losses, Vader was able to board Silo's flagship just before he escaped to hyperspace bound for Kuat. Once aboard, Vader began killing his way through Silo's subjects, heading for the bridge. But Silo had a plan. He had chosen Kuat for a very specific reason. Resting in orbit above the planet was none other than the Executor, the Emperor's personal flagship. After activating his own ship's self-destruct functions, Silo escaped aboard an escape pod and boarded the Executor. His plan was simple: board the Star Destroyer, ram his own destroyed ship into the hull, take the Emperor prisoner, and make off into the sunset. But he hadn't counted on Vader surviving. Despite Silo's ship impaling the Executor's hull, Vader not only survived, but boarded the flagship. Now trapped on the Executor's bridge, with a vengeful Sith Lord slicing his way through the ship toward him, Silo split his forces in two. One was sent to take the Emperor prisoner, while the other half was posted at the bridge, hoping to stop Vader from reaching him. Obviously, none of these experiments stood a chance against Vader. The Sith Lord soon reached the bridge and was ready to cut the scientist down when he pulled out the ace in his sleeve, a small device that could disable Vader's cybernetics. But Vader wasn't defeated. Through willpower alone, he made his body move, grasped his lightsaber, and cut Silo 5 down. Somewhere else, Silo 6 opened his eyes and planned an escape. He didn't make it. Darth Vader was soon on his heel, boarding his whale ship and cutting his way through Silo's forces. This included all of Silo's clone bodies, which all woke up to try and take him down. After finally reaching Silo 6, he and Vader exchanged several taunts. The scientist maniacally claimed that he transcended nature itself and conquered the Force, devising a way to live forever. In response, Vader used the mind trick to send the whale ship into a literal star, vaporizing Silo 6 and every single Silo body on board, finally putting an end to the mad scientist once and for all. In many ways, Silo wasn't special. Neither his goals nor the technology and techniques he employed were unique. What set him apart, however, was his sheer ambition. Where other mad scientists failed to make a name for themselves, Silo thought of the bigger picture. He played Imperial office politics so well that even the Emperor couldn't have him executed at will, and he certainly gave Vader a run for his money, even if he never really posed a threat to the Sith. Though Silo was ultimately unsuccessful, his legacy would live on to cause misery for billions of people. All the major projects he worked on, from the Tucken Initiative to the Death Star to Vader himself, caused more grief than could ever really be measured, and though Silo himself wasn't solely responsible for any of them, he undeniably played a major role in these atrocities. And for that, he's definitely earned his spot in the 9 hells of Corellia. And there you have it, the tales of some of the galaxy's most twisted scientists. Who do you think was the craziest of the bunch? Would you like to see a similar video focused on the galaxy's most infamous Sith alchemists? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.